I'm just getting us set up, guys. Got a few more people coming in. All right, yes, Dexter, this has started. Thank you for joining. Looks like we've got a few people here. We might wait for a few more to come in. In the meantime, feel free to type your questions in the comment bar. And just a reminder that there is a little bit of a lag. So if you type your question and I don't get to it for a little while, it's because of the lag. Good, we're racking up some views. So I'll go ahead and get started since we only have 30 minutes tonight. I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Leah, and I will be seeking the DFL endorsement for Minnesota's 8th District of Congress. I declared a couple of weeks ago, and this is my first Facebook Q&A session, so I'm really excited to answer some of your questions and get to know some of the issues that you want to hear most about, that you want to talk most about. So I'll introduce myself briefly to get us started, and just for those who haven't met me yet, and then I will start to take your questions. And as I mentioned earlier, before some folks got on, there is a little bit of a lag. So if you type a question and I don't get to it right away, it's just because of the lag time there. So to start off, I will introduce myself briefly and kind of get us going on some questions. I grew up in Two Harbors, Minnesota, and I was there through high school, graduated, very excited to learn Spanish throughout all of high school, but my high school only offered French. So I had to wait until college to learn Spanish. And I went to college, studied Spanish, and lived over in Spain for 2 years teaching English to 3rd and 4th graders. So when I came home in 2008, I wanted to continue using my Spanish skills, and I blasted my resume out everywhere, and I was contacted by a contractor for Immigration Customs Enforcement. They needed fluent Spanish speakers who could translate for undocumented immigrants that were navigating deportation proceedings. So I did that and moved on to work in Immigration and Customs Enforcement directly a couple years later, and I served there for 4 years, and then I went on to get my master's at the Humphrey School and eventually took on a job at the FBI. I was sent out to Quantico in the summer of June 2015, and I trained for 3 months at Quantico before coming back to Minnesota to work as an intelligence analyst for the FBI. So in my career, which is mostly focused on national security, I've really seen a lot of broken laws up close and personal. I've enforced a lot of laws that aren't protecting the people that they're supposed to protect. They're not as effective as they should be, and in many situations, they often make it worse. So when I woke up on November 9th, like many of you, I felt hopeless because I felt that any inkling of fear I had been realized, that the laws were going to continue to get worse, that President Trump had run on a campaign on a platform of travel bans and border walls and bombings as a way to protect our country. And I know that there are a lot of things that we can do to protect our country that are more related to economic security, food and housing security, equal access to healthcare and education. And those type of changes are far more effective than border walls and bans and bombs. So That is my story, long and short of it. I stayed with the FBI for several months, and it was finally in about mid-May that I realized I really needed to make the change from enforcement of our laws to helping have a voice in changing our laws. So I submitted my resignation to the FBI. Coincidentally, it was also the week that Director Comey was fired. So even though it wasn't planned that way, it made me feel that I was doing the right thing, because I knew that with the interference from the White House in some of our executive branch duties, it was only going to get worse. So I got on my motorcycle and I drove around the district, the 8th district, calling it Around the 8th in 80 Days, as a way to get to know the issues that are prevalent throughout the entire district. The district is 27,000 square miles, and it's very, very different across the board. So I grew up in Two Harbors, but I live now in Isanti, the southern part of the district. So I knew from having lived in 2 different areas of the district how different our economies can be, how different the landscape is, how different the political and social and economic landscape is. So I told myself that I wouldn't decide if I was equipped to run for this office until I had traveled to every single county seat, spoken to as many people as I possibly could, and really assessed whether or not this was needed. And what I found throughout my travels is that we are pretty divided in some senses. My travels gave me a lot of hope. It really instilled a sense of faith in Minnesotans' resourcefulness and our ability to meet any challenge. But I also realized that we're still fighting a lot amongst one another on the best way forward. So my goal with this campaign is to try to find a middle ground between the different factions that are often at loggerheads, right? Whether it's within the same party, whether it's the Republican and Democratic Party, any sort of discord that we have, I feel we can find some common ground and start there. So that's really the theme of this campaign, is looking at ways that we can find common ground and move forward. So with that, I'm going to scroll through some of the comments really quickly here and get some of the questions. Okay. Okay, I believe there had been, there was a question about a dues-paying member of the union. So when I was with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, I was not a law enforcement officer. So I started off as a contractor for 2 years, which is not covered under the union. And then for 2 years, I worked as what was called a deportation officer's assistant, an enforcement and removal assistant. And then I was a dues paying officer in the union. And then after that, I moved into a mission support position, and mission support is considered more aligned with management. So we were not allowed to join the union. We were aligned more in the management track. Currently, I work for Augsburg University, and Augsburg voted last semester to join SEIU. So I am on the bargaining committee for SEIU to try to raise the wages and raise benefits and improve the environment and climate for part-time adjunct faculty like myself. So that has been an incredible learning experience. I'm going to go on to Barbara's question. Governor Dayton just announced his support of the Polymet copper nickel mine, as long as it meets the environmental standards and financial safeguards. What do these criteria mean to you, and who should be setting the standards and safeguards? Well, first of all, I support the state being able to dictate financial safeguards and environmental standards. So I'm particularly concerned about Representative Emmer's Minor Act, which would take state control away and leave the decisions about extracting minerals in the state of Minnesota solely up to Congress. So it would make an exception just for the state of Minnesota and ensure that Congress has complete power over whether or not we extract minerals in Minnesota. So first of all, to answer Barbara's question, it should be done at the state level, and that's why I oppose the Minor Act. I believe that our state regulations, if they are not interfered with, can prove adequate safeguards for mining projects that may be untested here in Minnesota. So when politicians begin to weigh in too heavily on some of these projects, it starts to interfere and prevent the regulatory process from working as intended. Next question, Michelle. You worked for the FBI and Homeland Security, which are notorious for surveillance of American citizens. Do you think federal agencies, including the FBI and DHS, go too far in their surveillance and data collection? That's a good question. I, at the FBI, was trained extensively in how to respect the parameters that that FBI has in their power. So I'm sure you've probably heard of FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, that was talked about a lot during some of the Russia meddling conversations. So at the FBI, you're trained extensively in limiting your powers to focus only on those who are subjects of an investigation. So I trust our agencies to limit their powers, but that kind of doesn't get to the broader question, which is, are the powers too broad to begin with? I have, as a private citizen, have been incredibly concerned about what the NSA has been doing, and I can't speak as intelligently as to what or why their program was set up as broadly as it was, but I can tell you that some of the things I've read as far as the scope of some of their surveillance has exceeded the bounds of normal investigations. I'm going to get to Matt's question before it disappears. What do you believe would be the most effective thing that could be done legislatively to diversify and progress the economy in the 8th District, mining issues aside? Really good question. My family, the women in my family, have built small businesses for 4 generations. My mom runs a business called Training Connections. My grandma owned Sherry's Kitchen, which is the Vanilla Bean currently in Two Harbors, and she still runs an antique shop on her premises. My great-grandma ran range catering up in Virginia. So long story short, I believe that small businesses are going to be and continue to be the backbone of our economy. So if we equip small business owners to be able to get the loans that they need, to be able to open up shop, to not be overburdened, they will be able to diversify the economy in ways that large corporations can't always. I'm sure that some of you saw the Blandon paper mill has laid off announced that they will be laying off 150 employees. And when your economy is built around a singular industry like that, a layoff of that magnitude can really, really hurt a town. So I'm looking to expand tax credits and ensure that small business owners have the tools that they need to diversify the economy. Enid said, though you have great enthusiasm, you have no experience in public office. What makes you equipped to be effective at passing legislation if you will have no seniority or previous relationships with member of Congress? That's a very good question. So there has been a number of our legislators who had no previous experience before getting elected to office. Tim Walz immediately comes to mind. Paul Wellstone immediately comes to mind, Jason Lewis, Al Franken. So we currently have 3 sitting Congress members that didn't have any legislative experience, had not run for office prior to being elected to Congress. Also, additionally, there are groups such as Brand New Congress that are working to get essentially a brand new Congress elected. I believe they have nominated somewhere around 10 to 12 people. And once those people are elected and put into office, they intend to form coalitions and to be able to work to pass previously agreed upon legislation. And there will be a strength in numbers idea between the new folks who are elected through programs like Brand New Congress to be able to work together and use their numbers to really increase and pass legislation. And I also believe that we need to start thinking about the future in terms of setting up our legislative bench. So in 2016, we sent our oldest congressional delegation in the state history of Minnesota to Congress. So we really need to start thinking about, is 2018 the best year, if there indeed is going to be a blue wave, to start to transition some of these seats? And if we don't transition in 2018, then when will we transition? So it's always scary to, elect a new person to Congress, but I think that it's a risk worth taking, especially if we want to build a long-term strategy for the future. Okay, Dexter Larson says, what can we do to reduce gun deaths? I think that there are some very good common sense legislative efforts that we can undertake to reduce gun deaths. And I'm working on adding a gun safety page to my issues page on the website. But just to kind of give you a brief rundown, universal background checks are absolutely a must. And I know that from having worked at the FBI and seen how people are able to get their hands on guns and how passing universal background checks could help reduce that. Also looking at high-capacity magazines and other ways that we have seen implemented in some of these recent spates of gun deaths. Some of the largest violent acts that have been created have been happening lately have been with high-capacity magazines and assault rifles. So we need to take a serious look at how those can help prevent gun deaths as well. I'm going to try to get to this question before it disappears here. Northern Minnesota has repeatedly taken hits, mining, paper mills, logging, and these have a wide range of side jobs, meaning the spin-off jobs. How can small businesses fill the void of these lost jobs? Well, I think for one thing, we absolutely can't give up on our big industries. So Cindy mentions mining, paper mills, logging. We cannot give up on those industries. We need to ensure that our existing mines, our 9 taconite mines and plants that we have in northeastern Minnesota, have the resources they need to be successful and to continue providing the good jobs that they've been providing for generations. I think I mentioned earlier that my family has worked in the Iron Range mining industry for 4 generations. My dad retired from North Shore Mining, my grandfather retired from FTAC Mining, and my great-grandfather was at Mahoning as well as his father. So these industries have been in place for generations, and we can't just give up on them. We need to make sure that the government is doing the best that they can to help bolster these, because we need mining, we need paper mills. So this small business component is a complement to that, not a substitute. We still need these incredible industries that we have right now. Okay. I'm an enrolled Fond du Lac and take much pride in native sovereignty. Do you agree with the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior? I will, Manilan, I will have to look into the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior Chippewa Non-Intercourse Act and send you an email, because I'm afraid I did not read up on that prior to tonight's Q&A. But if you have any information that you can send me as well, I would love to read it and then sit down and talk with you about it, because Native issues is something that I heard a lot about this summer. It's something that I'm very, very dedicated to hearing more about, to learning more about, to elevating more voices in. And I am incredibly dedicated to making sure that we don't silence Native voices, especially when we're talking about a lot of the projects that have environmental concerns surrounding Native lands and treaty rights. I'm going to move on to Jen. How will you protect the environment in the 8th, specifically against the threats posed by mining? Mining is non-sustainable and provides jobs that lead to cycles of layoffs and financial insecurity. I like the sustainable word. So I've been talking to my economic development team about putting together a sustainable practice for mining, which would include putting together something similar to a blue-green coalition, putting together a coalition of stakeholders, including mining interests, CEOs, labor, environmental advocacy groups, and getting them all to sit down at the table and talk about how Minnesota can be a leader in environmentally sustainable practices when it comes to mining. So we're still mining taconite, or we send a lot of our taconite over to other countries to be worked with, and we need to ensure that we're keeping that industry here, because that's been in our history for a long time. But when you're looking at these new kinds of mining, if you're talking about copper nickel mining and some of the untested types of mining, I think that ultimately the state is going to make a lot of decisions in that arena, as we've seen with Governor Dayton coming out in support of PolyMet. So as a federal legislator, as someone who's representing the 8th District in Congress at the U.S. Congress level, I would work hard to make sure that the environmental regulations, if these mines do come into being, that we have the most stringent, the highest possible level of environmental standards. And not just that, but I want to make sure that we're talking about what kind of companies are coming in to set up an industry here in Minnesota's mining region. So are we inviting companies that have poor labor rights records? Are we inviting companies that have notorious bankruptcy occurrences in their past? So looking beyond just the environmental standards, but also talking about the companies that are proposing this and making sure that they're up to Minnesota standards. Manilan. So Manilan asks about Native sovereignty as a whole. I am a constitutional scholar, or I like to fancy myself a constitutional scholar. And tribal rights, treaty rights, are the supreme law of the land. and that is my legal background. I have been studying law and the Constitution for 10 years, and it is right in our Constitution that treaty rights are the supreme law of the land. So I absolutely believe that we have for far too long ignored Native voices when talking about projects that are determined at the federal level, because Native voices are, as I've said before, the supreme law of the land according to our U.S. Constitution. So they have to be respected. Michelle, what would you say distinguishes you from the incumbent Rick Nolan, and what do you think you can accomplish that he can't? So I always joke, I've talked to Rick a couple of times, and we've had a lot of really good conversations. And we have a different strategy when we look at the folks that I'm targeting and trying to bring on board, and the voices that have felt somewhat neglected of late, looking at some of the environmental advocacy groups and other groups that feel that their voices aren't being heard. I want to ensure that I'm creating a large enough tent that all voices can be heard. And I joke with Rick too that, you know, he was first elected to Congress when he was 31 and I'm 33, and talking about the long-term planning for the district and 2018 and what a hopefully good year it will be for Democrats in creating a blue wave and getting us out to the polls and getting us the ability to turn over and transition some of these seats. So beyond just that, and where we kind of differ on some of the groups that we're bringing into the fold and everything, I look at national security from a different perspective, having worked in national security, and being able to bring the perspective and have a seat at the table with other national security professionals and say, look, our national security depends on economic security, food and housing security, every family having a roof over their head, and equal access to quality healthcare and quality education. And when you have somebody who's spent their career in national security at a table of professionals making that argument, it does resonate with folks. So I'm really hoping to bring a strong voice to the table that changes the conversation surrounding national security. Let's see. So Nathan says, though treaty rights are the law of the land and have often been discarded. Oh, I just lost the rest of your question, but I believe that you were talking about how do we ensure that Native voices are heard? So when we're talking about Native voices at the table, it also includes Native voices at the table. So getting more Native Americans that are seeking elected office, helping them, providing them with the resources, and getting them to hold positions of power, and not just treating them as coalition members that just join the table when they're invited. We need to make sure that our Native American community have seats at the table, just like it's been difficult for women to often break into the realms of Congress at the Senate and House level. It's been as difficult, more difficult for people of color and the Native community to break into these levels. So I think we can start by ensuring that seats of power, positions of power are being filled with Native American voices. I found some reasons. Okay, so Marcia was asking about my quote in the Brainerd Dispatch, which talks about how something that affects Minnesota's resource, landscaping, and environment, such as mining, should be decided in state and not in Congress. Do you believe federal lands should be managed by the state? No. So the Polymet land swap, I believe, is what Marcia's talking about here. That is a decision that was made by the Forest Service, which is a federal executive branch. So that decision to finish that land swap was decided and approved by the Forest Service. So when I'm talking about decisions that should be made by the state versus Congress, I'm talking about the Miner Act, for example. The Miner Act is troubling to me because it would place all decisions to extract minerals in the state of Minnesota squarely in the hands of Congress. And I believe that the state of Minnesota should be the one making those decisions, not Congress. I hope that clarifies. Corey. Oh, Corey, I gotta hit see more on your comment. Sorry, it's gotten a little truncated here. Oh, okay, perfect. So Corey is asking about the timing of an op-ed that I wrote in February. So the reason that I wrote that op-ed when I did was because I anticipated the public reaction. So I worked for Immigration and Customs Enforcement under the Obama administration, which was a good time. We all wish we could go back to the Obama days. But I was very disappointed in Obama's inability to pass immigration reform. I was working for ICE when the DREAM Act was passed. I was working when there was 2 prosecutorial discretion memos that prioritized the level of undocumented immigrants that would be prioritized for deportation, so violent felons and things like that. And as pleased as I was to see that we were actually focusing on public safety issues and focusing on the DREAM Act and getting Dreamers the legal status that they deserve, I knew in my heart that the second Obama was gone, those executive orders would go with him. I mean, obviously, if Hillary had won, that would be a different story, but I know how tenuous executive orders are. So the reason I wrote the op-ed when I did, it was shortly after Trump had taken office, and I saw those executive orders start to be peeled back. And it worried me because I wanted the public to focus on immigration reform and focus on our lawmakers and say, lawmakers, why aren't you passing immigration reform that is a permanent change to our laws, not temporary fixes like executive orders are? So I wrote the op-ed to tell the public that when you're distracted by vilifying those who enforce the laws, then you're not able to concentrate on those who make the laws. So I want to see a strenuous push for immigration reform that will be a permanent change to our laws, not a patchwork of state laws or executive orders that can be repealed every time there's a new administration coming in. So that was my intent behind highlighting it at the time that I did. Okay. Do you think the government should be able to negotiate drug prices with the pharmaceutical industry? I absolutely think that getting the government involved and lowering our prescription drug prices is one of the fundamental things that we can do now immediately to start helping people with their healthcare costs. So I'm a proponent of single-payer healthcare. I support Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All bill, but on my website, on the issues page, I also go into a few things that we can immediately do right now while we're still voting and deciding and gaining the momentum that we need to get Medicare for All passed. So I would start with negotiating prices with pharmaceutical industry, absolutely, expanding the public option, considering putting together a critical labor force, which would be the areas that I heard of most traveling the district that are really hurting right now. There's a lack of licensed daycare facilities throughout the district, so parents can't find daycares. So when you're looking at critical labor force industries like group homes, daycares, nursing homes, personal care attendants who staff those areas, they're having a really hard time getting the health care coverage that they need, getting the pay that they need. I talked to many PCAs who are making $9 an hour, doing back-breaking work for $9 an hour with hardly any benefits, and it breaks my heart because people like my grandparents and people like my great aunt and uncle depend on PCAs and other healthcare professionals to take care of them in ways that their family members sometimes can't. So I want to see a critical labor force that is able to buy into insure or buy into the ACA at a reduced price so that they can get the healthcare coverage that they need, and we can get more people into these professions, start opening up more daycare centers and giving CPAs and PCAs and different group home attendees the care that they deserve when they're caring for our friends and family and relatives. Let's hear. If elected, will you take PAC, super PAC money? So special interest groups, and campaign finance reform, that is a huge, huge topic for me. So I absolutely support campaign finance reform. I always joke that I've been doing this congressional race on about $500. I think that's what I spent this summer when I traveled around on my bike. So I think that in lieu of campaign finance reform, what we can do right now is start spending less on our elections, start spending our money in smarter ways. So taking PAC money, for example, Women Winning is a PAC, and I'm a big supporter of Women Winning because they support pro-choice women running for office, along with Emily's List. So completely saying no to PAC money would take them off the list. What I will say no to is special interest money that is backed by corporate financing. So I'm looking at PACs that support and promote the ideals that I hold and I believe in. For example, women winning an Emily's List. And just to get off on a little tangent about campaign finance reform, if I can, I think that there is so much that we can do now to help reduce the costs of our campaigns. So many of you know that the 8th District was the most expensive congressional campaign in 2016. And that was for a variety of different reasons. One, we had a self-funding millionaire in the race. Two, it's a notorious swing district, so there was a lot of outside money poured in. So I think that we're looking at a lot of different reasons as to why this was so expensive. But 2018 is a very different landscape than 2014 or 2016. We don't have a self-funded millionaire in the race, and we also are still considered a swing district, but we're looking at Republicans being on the defense in a lot of areas that they already control. So I hypothesize, and I may not find this to be true, but I hypothesize that this will be slightly less expensive than in past years. And I hope that I can contribute to bringing down the cost of our campaign, of financing our campaigns, by just running a smarter, better campaign. Doing things like this, Facebook Q&As, so that I'm not spending money for a staffer and I to travel to different parts of the district all the time. I obviously love doing in-person meet and greets. I did that all summer, and I plan to continue doing that. But cost-effective things like this are wonderful. Getting your message out on social media. This summer, as I was traveling the district, I would send promoted Facebook ads for $40 or $50 to each region that I was visiting. So when I was about to head out to Brainerd or Little Falls, I would run a promoted ad out there a week ahead of time and tell people where I would be, what I was doing, and how they could find me. And it was all very inexpensive. So the democratization of democracy through social media is really helping us break through some of the infrastructure that leads campaigns to be so expensive. So I will fight tirelessly to get campaign finance reform passed, because I think it's one of the most pressing issues of our time, along with climate change. But in the meantime, I want to contribute to bringing down the cost of campaign finance reform just by virtue of how I run this campaign. Okay, carbon tax. So Sherry, I will have to get back to you. I do like everything I'm reading about carbon tax. I think that it's being promoted as one of the most effective ways to combat climate change. So I want to look specifically into the numbers of the amount of the tax, the percentage, how it would be applied, and things like that. And I want to make sure that I get back to you in more detail on that. But in general, on what I know about the carbon tax, I think that it is a very effective way to help combat climate change. So if we don't have any other questions that are popping up here, and I'm sorry, I might have missed a few, but I did put the website up there, phiferforcongress.com, and there's a contact Leah form on the website that you can send me some questions to, and my email address is just info@phiferforcongress.com. So we are at our 30 minutes, so I'm gonna finish up the live stream here, but I do encourage you to send me any of your questions via email or through the contact form on the website, and I will be having another Facebook Q&A live event probably in the next 1 to 2 weeks. So thank you so much for everyone that joined. I really appreciate all your thoughtful questions, and I always welcome dialogue. I travel around the district all the time, so don't feel like you only have to communicate with me through social media or email. I am a millennial, but I am against that being the only mode of communication. I am all about in-person coffee shops, taking a walk down by the lake, whatever we can do. So if you want to get together in person, I absolutely welcome that too. Thank you so much, and please remember to go to your precinct caucuses on February 6th. I am seeking and abiding by the DFL endorsement, which means that we need to get folks turning out to their caucuses and getting elected as delegates and making sure that we have our voice heard when we are going into the convention. So February 6th, mark your calendars. We'll be putting a lot more information out there, and we'll be getting times and locations for your area to you as soon as possible. So thank you so much, and I will see you next time.